Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I'm Hunter Ohanian from the Stonewall National Museum here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and we're very happy to have all of you here with us. And I'd like to introduce our two guests this evening. Say hello to Eric Rhein. Eric, say hi.
Hi. Hi.
Where are we finding you this evening?
I'm actually in Columbus, Ohio. I'm based in New York City and have a studio in Jersey City, but I'm actually in Ohio because my mother is in the hospital. So I'm spending some time here helping her.
Well, it's great that you're helping her, and I hope that her health recovers. Also, say hello to Paul Michael Brown. Hello, Paul. Where are we finding you?
Hi there. I'm at my house in Lexington, which is where I'm based full-time right now. So.
Lexington, Kentucky.
In Kentucky, yeah.
Yeah, and how are things there?
Good. Yeah, I can't complain.
Good. Well, we're going to be talking about a book called Lifelines, which really is about Eric's work. If you have not received a copy of it, this is what it looks like. And we'll be talking about that in just a moment. But just to give people a little bit of background about Stonewall, we're one of the largest LGBTQ archives in the United States. We've been around for 47 years. Our library has 28,000 volumes in it. And our archive has over 2,700 linear feet of material. And I didn't realize what that meant when I first heard that number, but if you imagine gay material going all the way up one side of the Empire State Building and all the way down the other, that's what 2,700 linear feet looks like. It represents about 6 million pages of LGBTQ history. Most of it is from 1950 to the present day. So there are tape recordings and serials and videotapes and period articles, almost all from the United States. I'd say about 90% from the US, and then 10% are from outside of the US. If you have things that you would like to have preserved, please contact us. And the best way to do it is through our website at stonewall-museum.org. And of course, there on the website, you can find out everything about the organization and what we're doing. You can actually search our library. You can search the card catalog at our library. And you can also see a lot of curated things that we've put together for you in the archives. There's also a major finding aid of over 200 pages of all the categories of the items that we have in the archive. So it's a great tool for everybody. And also, if you're not a regular member of Stonewall, you can certainly join and become a member. You can also get our free weekly newsletter, which gives you access to information about programs like this. This talk is going to be recorded, and if you give us about 2 or 3 days, you'll be able to find it on our website at stonewall-museum.org. If you have questions or comments, if you're here live, we ask that you just post those either in the Q&A or the chat, and we will get to those in the course of the hour of this talk. And also, I want to say hello to all of our friends on Facebook. Many people see these talks there, and so welcome to all of you if you happen to be watching it there. And then I also want to say hi to my colleague, Paula Sierra, who's behind the scene here. Hello, Paula. Nice to see you.
Hey.
Nice to see you. Thank you, Paula, for doing the work that you do to try to help make all of this stuff happen. One last thing I want to say is just about exhibitions that we have at Stonewall. Right now, we only have one exhibition up. It's called Don't Ask, Do Tell, which is using material from our archives, which traces the entire 225-year period of the U.S. military's relationship with the LGBTQ community, starting from George Washington's lieutenant, who was arrested for sodomy, going all the way up to Joe Biden's time, in which he allowed all members of the gay community to serve within the U.S. military. And so it's a wonderful story to see the back and forth and how all of that has changed, and also clearly how much politics has played a major part of it. Hopefully next week we'll be opening a second exhibition called Misinformation. And what Misinformation is about the first facts that came out from 1983 to the late 80s about the causes and cures and possible treatments for HIV and AIDS. A lot of that misinformation was spread through books books that we've found in our archive, as well as newspapers. And so it is a very telling story, which is very applicable to things that people are learning today about COVID. And so there are a lot of theories that were put out there at the time, and the exhibition explores those. We'll be opening that exhibition. I believe they're painting next week, and then the wall letters will go up. I've seen it all. It's been framed. And so we'll be opening that this month as well. We will be doing a curated talk of that show, of that exhibition. And so that will appear in this whole series. Lastly, I want to say thanks to our friend at Our Fund. Our Fund is a community foundation located here in Fort Lauderdale, and they're the ones who've made this program and this series possible for us. So thank you so much to everybody at Our Fund. So I think those are all the notes that I have here. And so Eric, let's start with you and talk a little bit about Lifelines and the book, and sort of give everybody a general sense of what it's about and how it came about.
Well, I refer to the book very much as a monograph memoir, because it addresses and contextualizes my work in very much of a memoir form. It's very much related to the fact that through the years, I have continual contact with younger curators and artists who sometimes they find me through visual aids, and sometimes they do searches when they're looking into artwork that's been done around activism and HIV. So Lifelines really came about when Paul came to visit my studio in 2017, which he'll go into some, and it really emphasizes, that studio visit emphasized so strongly that connection that I find very rewarding with these younger people. Paul, we discovered during that studio visit, was about to turn 27, which happens to be the same age that I was when I tested positive. So as we're showing, going through my work, particularly the photographs that he was drawn to, this context between me and him, and the generational connection, intergenerational connection, was really very significant.
Yeah, that's great. It's great that visit brought this together. Just so people know, of course, Eric went to school at SVA, received his MFA in 1984, and his BFA in 84, and his MFA in 2000. And Eric's work has been shown really around the United States and the US in a variety of places. I believe I showed some of it at Leslie Lomina over the years, and certainly Eric and I have worked on a number of projects. You can visit and see Eric's work through his website, and Paula will throw that up in the chat. And also, Eric did mention Visual Aids, which is a wonderful archive, New York-based, which really represents work by artists, either living or not at this point, but also who have HIV and AIDS. And they do a wonderful job promoting that work and advocating for it. So Eric has had a long history of work with HIV and AIDS, and also, as he mentioned, advocacy as well too. And as I look at this project, there is a lot of advocacy in that. Paul, as he said, is a curator, who is based in Lexington, Kentucky. Is that where you're from originally?
I'm from Owensboro, Kentucky, which is a little bit smaller in the western part of the state, but I moved to Lexington in 2009 for school, spent a little bit of time in New York in between living there the first time and moving back in 2017. But yeah, I've been off and on based here for about 10 years.
So given the pivotal role that you had in creating this book and this particular work, how was it that you found Eric and had that studio visit, which brought the project together?
Yeah, well, this is sort of a really interesting story, especially in context with you all hosting this event, because it was actually through another queer archive that's based here in Central Kentucky called the Faulkner Morgan that we were put in touch. So the Faulkner Morgan, which has been around for 3 or 4 years now, their mission is to document the LGBT history of the state of Kentucky And Eric has a very important link to that history through his uncle, Lige Clarke, who was a very prominent gay rights activist in the 60s and 70s. And so Eric had been brought to, or had been put in touch with Jonathan Coleman, who runs the archive, to sort of talk about his uncle and show some of the archival materials from his uncle's life. And I'm a big fan of the archive, so I'd like to tag along whenever there's people there. So I think I was just sort of hanging out and got to meet Eric that way. So.
Great. Well, you know, the invitation's always there. Come down to visit the archives here in Fort Lauderdale. We have many people. I mean, every week we have researchers from all around the United States coming to do work there. And so the invitation is there for you to come down and check what we have. We actually have some holdings. You know, I'm familiar with that archive that you're mentioning in Kentucky, but I'll have to reach out to them and share the list of what we have from Kentucky and make sure that they at least have digital copies of what we have. So.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, we can certainly put you in touch with John Coleman, who's a dear friend of both of us. He's one of the co-founders.
Good. Okay, well, so I think what we're going to start with is, Paul, you wrote an essay for the book, and so I think Eric is going to share some images here. And so why don't we turn it back over to you?
Sounds good. Yeah, and so some of this actually starts with sort of some of the narrative that we were just talking about. So it may sound a little familiar to start, but yeah, so I'll go ahead and get started. So Eric Rhein's studio is vast and bright. Surfaces are full and shelves store existing works and material resources for future ones. Nothing is out of place. All is arranged with meticulous grace, and the room is open and inviting, a calm sanctuary within a repurposed warehouse. A breeze seems to fill the space, even though there is none. Eric was a late holdout against gentrification, only relocating to his current studio in Jersey City in 2016, after being in New York City's East Village since 1980. From the early 80s through the mid-90s, AIDS deaths shifted the financial ecology of New York City real estate, wiping out or displacing a significant portion of artists, working class, and the very queer neighborhoods that were there, making way for luxury condos, pricey restaurants, and hip bars. The studio remains an homage both to the aesthetics and attitudes that defined the East Village in the 80s and 90s, and also to Eric's deep ancestral roots in Appalachian Kentucky. A large piece of driftwood stands in a sunlit corner. Vintage cabinets house delicate, elegant fragments of wire and salvaged objects, grouped by size, color, and type. Resting among his artworks are archival documentation and ephemera, notes from friends and lovers, old photographs and postcards, heirlooms and mementos. Eric is soft-spoken and moves gently and a little nervously. He walks to one of the several large tables in the studio, tells me to make myself comfortable, and straightens a few stacks of drawings and boxes of photographs, leaving me to explore the room. It's August 2017, my first visit to the studio. I had met Eric and his mother, Shelbyana, in Lexington, Kentucky a few weeks prior to becoming director of Institute 193. We were introduced by John Coleman, a historian and co-founder of the Faulkner Morgan Archive. The archive documents the queer history of Central Kentucky, and John had invited Eric and Shelby there to recount their memories of Lige Clarke, Shelby's brother and Eric's uncle. Lige, who was born and raised in Hindman, Kentucky, was an outspoken and well-known figure of the gay liberation movement in the 60s and 70s. Lige and his partner, Jack Nichols, wrote for the Mattachine Review and Screw, then went on to publish the first national newspaper focused on gay issues, aptly titled Gay. It was launched 5 months after the Stonewall riots in 1969. Lige and Jack appeared on top talk shows of the era, making them one of the most prominent same-sex couples in America. Lige was murdered under mysterious circumstances in an execution-style killing while in Veracruz in 1975. Hanging prominently on a sidewall is a shadow box mixed media assemblage entitled Uncle Lige's Sword. It is the first piece we speak about during the visit and serves to ground the discussions that follow, which in turn serve as the basis for the direction of this book and Eric's 29 exhibition at Institute 193 in Lexington. This is appropriate as this work's construction and conception are emblematic of Eric's wide material knowledge and ability to layer meaning both densely and poetically. Central to the composition is a brooch in the shape of a sheathed sword. The object, which belonged to Lige, simultaneously stands as a symbol for his particular brand of charismatic yet uncompromising activism, and makes oblique reference to contemporary safer sex practices, linking and interpenetrating periods of varied queer experience. A leaf from a beech tree signifies the landscape surrounding Eric's ancestral home in Appalachia. The objects in Uncle Lige's sword are set within a wire framework that evokes gilded, illuminated manuscripts. Serving as a substrate for the other objects in the assemblage is a spread of pages from a medical textbook that references techniques for counting blood cells, making a link to the artist's own relationship to HIV, as well as his uncle's violent end from multiple gunshots to his chest, and the fact that the pair are closely related by blood. This single artwork deals with nearly a century of queer history as well as the artist's family, and can be linked to multiple geographies, all within a 16 by 22 inch frame. While discussing the piece, our conversation jumps from topic to topic, from queer history to instances of state intervention in the lives of queer folk, to our mutual roots in the rural South and complicated relationship with the region, to notions of family, how we make it and how it makes us. Eric's words come in with strength that seems out of sync with his gentle character. He has a lot to say, and there's an urgency behind every statement. In much of his artwork, and in the way he speaks, time and place collapse. 1967 and 1987 share a breath with the present, and all is alive at once. Behind us are selections from Eric's ongoing project Leaves, a series of leaf-shaped drawings made of sculpted wire, each a memorial to someone he knew who died from AIDS-related complication. If the work, honoring hundreds of individuals, were to be assembled in one place, it would be massive. When shown in a large grouping, notions of collective response and mourning as a communal responsibility and action take precedence. Shown in smaller groups or individually, the leaves reference personal histories and relationships between people affected and emphasize an individual human narrative over numbers, statistics, and trends. Both perspectives are necessary for addressing the history and current reality of HIV and AIDS. The work is ongoing and emphasizes the massive human cost of the crisis and the fact that it continues today. According to the CDC, HIV and AIDS-related illnesses and deaths, as well as rates of new infection, are disproportionately high in the South, and communities of color are affected at yet higher rates within that population. Kentucky is no exception. These disparities are thought to be related to a number of factors endemic to the region, including concentrated poverty, unequal access to care, insufficient federal funding, lack of adequate sex education, HIV criminalization, squeamishness about sexuality, and rampant stigmatization of those with HIV. These fears and barriers lead to fewer and later diagnoses, which in turn amplify risk for new infections and death within the community. HIV and AIDS are far from over, despite development of drugs like PrEP and the availability of successful treatment regimens for people who are HIV positive. Although these tools are available, the above factors ensure that new infections and preventable deaths will continue. At some point in our conversation, we come across the fact that in a few months, I will be the same age, 27, as Eric was when he was diagnosed with HIV in 1987. It feels important and serendipitous, and for a moment, we live through the experience of the other. We are quiet, acknowledging with a glance the weight of history and circumstance, which unites people like us in communion. In moments like this, I feel like we're family. Eric breaks the silence by telling of an especially difficult episode. In fall of 1994, while hospitalized in an altered mental state, believed at the time to have been brought about by HIV entering his brain, he created a series called Hospital Drawings. A number of the drawings are of eyes set against mottled colorscapes, all crying. Some of the drawings include texts: a mother's tears, Sai's tears, Jamie's tears, shed in response to his endangered state. I tell him that when I came out in 2009, one of the first things my mom mentioned was that she was terrified I'd get sick. It's something that's not unique to my family. For most of my friends born within a few years of me, the same fear is brought up by well-meaning parents who came of age at the apex of the AIDS crisis. It feels, however, like a thin and ill-constructed mask, if not always conscious, for their larger concerns about having queer children. I wonder aloud why, even while standing within an arm's length of death, or while mourning a generation of our kin, we consider ourselves to be burdensome to those around us. Displayed in the studio are a few black and white silver gelatin prints of young men. I ask Eric about them and if there are more. He gestured towards stacks of black archival boxes on a large table. The photographs, most of which were taken throughout the 90s, correspond to the period between Eric's diagnosis, encountering compromised health and near death, and his experience of a renewed sense of vitality after life-saving drugs were introduced in the mid-90s. The images can be dated with some accuracy by examining Eric's physical state in the photographs. Many of the images incorporate pastoral imagery. In the self-portrait Company, he is among trees with a leaf held out from his chest, its shadow cast onto his skin. Eric tells me that he credits his spiritual connection to nature, rooted in his frequent trips to Appalachia during childhood, with helping him to survive. Eric has varied relationships to the men pictured. They are friends, lovers, or boyfriends. Some are HIV positive and others are not. Some survive and many don't. As we sift through them, Eric calls them by name: William, Jeffrey, John, Andrew, Joe, Russell. He doesn't tell their stories so much as speak of them in regards to how they carried themselves, the way this one walked or that one spoke, how beautiful William looked on that day and how graceful his hands were, the scent of the bed after one or another of them left it, and what he felt when they entered or exited his life. A series of 4 photos taken in 1993 with the camera set on a timer shows Eric and Jeffrey in bed together. The sheets are startlingly white, almost disappearing into the wall behind. This creates an almost unreal space, their intertwined bodies in sharp contrast to their surroundings. It's great, isn't it? Eric says. It is, I respond. I mean his ass. He's got a spectacular ass, doesn't he? He does. Eric's blunt acknowledgement of Jeffrey's sexuality in a way that was so seemingly out of sync with our conversation up to that point crystallized what was beautiful and important about these images to me. Much of how I understood HIV and AIDS and their effect on queer communities until that point was based on the idea that the period had been one of emptiness, loss, and especially fear. Eric's images posit an alternative that prioritized resilience, love, and tenderness in the context of extraordinary circumstances. They marvel in intimacy. They undo the myth that AIDS prevents touching and loving. And they honor closeness and communion over isolation as a means to survive.
That is great, Paul, and it's such a wonderful essay that you wrote about seeing Eric's work. And so let me ask you, to sort of apart from the essay, but with everything that you've said and exposed, there was certainly a fair amount of yourself in that essay. As a 27-year-old gay man, HIV and AIDS has been around since before you've been around. I suspect that you're of a generation in which HIV and AIDS and sex were sort of all part of the same thing. You learned all of those things together. And as you spoke about your mother saying, you know, she was afraid when you came out that you would get sick. Of course, there's always been mothers' fears about people being gay. But talk to us a little bit about your personal side, about the idea of what it means being a 27-year-old gay man and realizing that HIV and AIDS is potentially part or even part of your future today, today as you deal with it on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when I was growing up and sort of dealing with those questions as a very young person, I feel like HIV and AIDS felt like sort of a threatening sort of specter, and I think that had a lot to do with like the self-loathing that I was feeling at the time as like a young closeted queer person. And I think that my understanding as I've gotten a little older has really shifted to 2 things. One is an awareness of the loss of, you know, mentors and figures that you know potentially could have been useful to me as a young person in terms of just being able to exist fully within a queer community. But also I think it's manifested as like a real appreciation for people that have lived through that period and who continue to live with HIV, and just yeah, just the amount of respect I have for for people that went through the height of that. But yeah, that's sort of how my thinking about it has morphed over time.
Yeah, because of course, even if somebody is HIV negative, as long as they're sexually active, they're still living with HIV.
Right.
Just today, there was a study that was started in Florida, which apparently is a study which the FDA has been working on, which is seeking out men who have sex with other men who are between the ages of 18 through 39, who have had sex with other men the last 3 months, for them to possibly get to the point that that last part of the prohibition against gay men donating blood, that they can find a way to that point. But even that, even if somebody is negative, it's still a way in which people who are HIV negative have to deal with HIV, not to mention how they relate to each other sexually. So it's an ongoing battle. I mean, and of course, as you point out, there, South Florida, of course, has some of the worst transmission rates for young people, and I think that's something which is very discouraging, I think, for people to see. And of course, sex education and transmission education has a lot to do with that. But it's an issue which is here with all of us. And as we look at this other pandemic going on, this other crisis going on, I've been reading that infection rates have been going up during COVID, and in some part, it's because public health resources have been shifted over to COVID as opposed to HIV, which is really unfortunate. So, but thank you for sharing that part. Eric, you, of course, this is really about work that you've made in your view about all of this. And before you read your memoir, maybe touch upon two things for us, just informally. If you can, describe for us what HIV and AIDS has meant to you, and then also I think touch on a little bit about the activism, because again, I'm assuming this, but I think a lot of your activism came as a result of your relationship to HIV and AIDS. Would you have been an activist without it? Did one lead to the other?
Well, I think, well, let's see. I want to, I'll share these next two images because it ties into what you've asked. When I tested HIV positive in 1987 at age 27, it of course was a very different landscape, and I was fortunate, I feel, in that I had a very strong spiritual core. I think it was very much seeded by finding these books about Uncle Lige Clarke and Jack Nichols that they wrote in the early 70s. And I found them about when I was hitting puberty. And they're, I Have More Fun With You Than Anybody. It's about their relationship and activism from when they first met in Washington, D.C. in the early 60s. And roommates can always be lovers. It's kind of an anthology of their Dear Abby kind of relationship to their readers who would write to them. And my uncle especially was really a humanist and a very expansive thinker. He quoted from Walt Whitman, and he carried Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. And so finding them just as I was hitting puberty and gave me a window into what it could be like not only to be a gay man, but an expansive human being, and because they're very much humanist. So I feel that when I tested positive, this centeredness that they gave me opened up a window for me to look at that as an opportunity to grow spiritually. And I got very involved with a group called the Healing Circle, which would gather maybe 200 or more people every Tuesday in a basement of a Catholic church, and work on mind-body awareness and healing. So it took me a couple of years to feel confident enough to begin to be open publicly about my status, and getting involved with visual aids at a time when Frank Moore was, and a number of other people for starting their archive project for artists who are HIV positive, was really instrumental in giving me a strength of possibility of bringing this activist sort of nature forward with HIV and AIDS. And at the time, there was a lot of stigmatization in the art world. So being a young artist in the art world and carving a way with that was rather challenging, but it was important to me to have a holistic approach to my life and have that identity of a HIV positive artist who wanted to serve a purpose with it was very important. So in a sense,
interesting. That's very interesting to hear as far as that relationship to them. And just so people know, both of these titles that Eric has on the screen, both of these titles are available at the Stonewall Library. We have many of Jack's papers. I don't know what we have about Lige's papers, but we certainly have both of those books in the library.
I'm the caretaker of my uncle's archives very much. His friend Steve Yates started sending photographs and things that Jack had given him. So I intend to use that material to make collaborative artworks with my uncle, and then also projects like this book, Lifelines, which a lot of my uncle is in this book. I feel that there is a correlation between me moving to the East Village in 1980, even though my uncle was killed many years before, and move only 6 blocks from where he lived was really significant. And then Paul being linked to me and to my uncle carries on that legacy.
Great. Well, why don't we move to your memoir?
Thank you. So this is called Notes from My Treehouse. And this photograph actually that I just hit upon is in a part of an essay that the poet Mark Doty wrote for the book as well. It has this kind of Walt Whitman-esque feel to it. And then this deer is a shamanistic animal, which Mark cites as coming out of the woods to see who we are at this particular point in our lives. So notes from my treehouse. Where I live in Manhattan's East Village, there's a weathered farm table at my window overlooking 14th Street that I call my hummingbird table. Red with crackled veins, its name comes by way of my sitting there, rendering wire hummingbird drawings and the history it holds. Red attracts hummingbirds, which the Aztecs believed were the reincarnated spirits of warriors, their presence holding the ability to transform conflict, internal and external. It's said that the moment someone dies, the weight of their body decreases 21 grams, the weight of a hummingbird. My mother keeps a hummingbird feeder, nurturing these seemingly delicate yet resilient creatures, as she's done with me throughout my history of living with HIV, having tested positive in 1987 at age 27. The northern side of the table is severed, cracked off from where my mother stood, reaching to clean dust for cobwebs for her son's return to life after an extended hospital stay in 2009. My mother and I cultivated a saying that I held the candle of hope, and when weary, she would take it until I could take it hold again. It was winter of 1995 when my mother looked up from where she stood and making chicken soup to see me through the bedroom window, emaciated and injecting medications into my thigh. Our eyes met for a second, long enough for me to see her gasp and cry. But we pretended I hadn't until later, when over chicken soup, she shared the tears for seeing her son as if he were an old man. My Granny Clarke said, the autumn leaves wear their bright Sunday school dresses to remind us of nature's glory, even as they die. Yes, I live in a treehouse, up to the level of the scholar trees outside my window. I'm an artist holdout in the East Village, having the presence in the neighborhood since 1980. The area is historically noted as creatively vibrant, but countless deaths of artists from AIDS shifted that. Seasonal colors of leaves envelop my windows in spring, summer, and fall, and the Jackson Pollock-like weave of the stark branches in winter recall the dream catchers of the Native Americans, from whose belief systems I draw inspiration. A half-rendered hummingbird awaits completion. It was put aside during the course of a conversation with a sweet fellow long-term survivor. He was disillusioned by ongoing challenges. He confided that he once again attempted to kill himself by halting his medications. As his T cells fell to danger level, he has resumed treatment, realizing the road to demise could be gruesome. We spoke of our paths seated in the 80s and 90s, cultivated by groups gathered by quest of healing, of teachings that touched us, the interconnection of mind, body, and spirit, alternative belief systems, the metaphysic, and the mystic. AIDS syndrome, with its physical, emotional, and financial realities, isn't lost on me. A cellular memory of illness and grief accompanies survivorship, along with bandages holding lives together. We've lived through war. Uncle Lige said you have to learn to bend like the willow. He is my guardian as I include themes of HIV and AIDS in my work in his activist footsteps. I'm blessed with my relationship with creativity continues as a healing companion and takes me out into the world. My art voices the course of AIDS, speaking names, telling stories. If the names of those who died of complications from AIDS aren't spoken, their stories told, they'll be forgotten. I do so as if I'm in a panic sometimes, as if somehow documenting the shared overwhelming experiences will ensure knowledge that we were here and our struggles mattered. There's a work in progress spanning my studio table under the working title Song of the Open Road. It's named after Walt Whitman's poem. An architectural proscenium of wire and salvaged objects contained by open books and their pages removed. And they're replaced with bronze castings of leaves, vintage jewelry, chandelier crystals, and oxidized hardware. They carry history. Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass show the love of men that he nursed during the Civil War. My mother says, poetry makes you strong, and you'll always have a friend. It was autumn in 1995, with my frame down to 27 pounds and my T cells to 4. Candida fungus was into my bone marrow, causing all blood counts to plummet when Dr. Bellman cautioned me not to go out of the house, for if I fell, I could hemorrhage. Still, I would make my rounds, gathering supplies, pausing along the way to catch my breath. Christmas Day of 1995 was celebrated just as the week preceding in Dr. Bellman's office under hour-long HIV drips. I'm sorry, they were ongoing hour-long IV drips of experimental medication for the eradication of my systemic candida. The treatment was lovingly nicknamed Shake and Bake for the chills and shaking which I had that accompanied it. A nurse stood by with an aspirin or water on hand as I strung cranberry and popcorn garlands. The treatment was successful. For a moment in time, before and through the window of the release of the protease inhibitors in 1996, I shared my home in bed with Ken, a young man I took under my wing and cared for as he waited and faded through illness. until our renewal due to the effectiveness of the protease inhibitors. Our lovemaking and slumber were often met with intermittent incontinence, yet we would rise, change the sheets, and resume spooning until daybreak. When in the year of 1996, I was graced with an acceptance into the study for the protease inhibitors, it was my mother who drove me to weekly hospital visits. She bore witness to the surreal rapid recovery due to the effectiveness of the combination therapy that lowered my viral load to undetectable, revitalizing the course of my life. The history of my survival and the stories of my friends who died are embodied in the objects I create. Shell-shocked as I am, I have a renewed sense of future. My canine companion Scout, with a tiny 8-pound being, is curled up at my feet as the clock on my computer shifts to 3 a.m. Scout is a companion in urban shamanism. Just as in a youth, my dog Daisy would accompany me along with the trees, soaked in nature's wisdom. My mixed breed rescue, with the look of a miniature deer, cultivates a connection to the range of humanity on our walks. She introduces me to our city of journeyers. Our path down 2nd Avenue passes St. Mark's Church, where the lives of so many artist friends I had died, and then were celebrated. There I sang the Tennessee Waltz for a lover lost. A storm of tears. Floodgates held by dams, and like Troublesome Creek, which runs through the ancestral town of Hyman, Kentucky, in Appalachia, churns up. To and above the banks, uncovering what was underneath held calmly at bay. The bathtub holds the memory of my mother as she prayed to what God there is to give her strength to emerge from the tub and help her son continue to live. She slept with my teddy bear, given to me by her mother on my first Christmas. A caravan of boxes, chapters of my memoir, artwork, fill my living room space. Entries of my diary, relics of my experience of living with HIV, then AIDS, conversations with men and women of youthful years, my next door neighbor, a man of 23, with me, 53, I'm old enough to be his father. He's interested in the history housed in my apartment, body and soul. Scout burrows under the covers next to me, as loving men through the years have done, some now dead, others alive. Some mornings we awake in the company of visiting spirits. For me, perceiving the young as reincarnations of people who died during the 80s and 90s is visceral. This first came to me through a conversation at a benefit for the Sylvia Rivera Project, its mission to enable all people to be free to self-determine their gender identity and expression, regardless of income or race. There, intergenerational artists and I contributed artwork for the auction. My friend Brian and I marveled at the vast presence of youth who were expansive in fluidity of gender and sexual identities. Brian pointed out that according to Buddhist beliefs, these 20 and 30-year-olds would be the reincarnations of those who died during the height of the AIDS epidemic. As he spoke, the hair stood on my arms, affirming and confirming. So I ended the reading with this photograph, which is the only one that I didn't take. It's actually the view of the cemetery in Hyman, Kentucky that goes up to the top of this mountain. And there's an image you can barely see, which is actually my Uncle Lige's casket. So I thought that it was a good way to end the book. It's actually on the back of the cover to have that intergenerational connection in that way.
Yes, if you, there we go. Good. Then we all get the full screen. Thank you so much for sharing that and reading it. It's such a powerful, the first time I read it, I was deeply moved, and it's such a powerful personal memoir. Let me start by asking you, you speak about a renewed sense of future. And of course, I tend to be the ultimate optimist. So tell us about that renewed sense of future that you feel.
Well, I think it has multiple meanings for me. Well, I think it's obvious from my reading that it's still very emotional material for me. So I'm continually bringing in AIDS activist concepts within my work, even though, you know, the vast amount of my work actually isn't specifically HIV oriented, but it's important to me to bring in that voice to it. At the same time, I recognize that there's a certain degree of trauma being perpetuated in my being. I mean, obviously I'm emotional, particularly now because my mother, who has been so much a part of my life, is you know, needing care, and she is getting better. I'm in this house of my sister with the watercolor that my friend Mats Gustafsson did at the time, shortly after I tested positive. And upstairs, I'm sleeping in my nephew Elijah's bedroom, who's named after, he's 19 and off to college. So renewed sense of future, you know, it has to do with my sense of future. It also has to do with Paul's, and a continuation of growth from my uncle to me to Paul. You know, when I wrote the memoir and when Paul and I put together the book, there were a lot of goals to it, a lot of inclusivity to messaging that I wanted to get out into the world. So including the Silver Rivera project, for instance, and the expansive, you know, fluid youth. There's something there's something occurs when I'm standing next to, particularly a young queer man, looking at my photographs of the same age that he might be now, that has this possibility of healing. That I hope to be a part of for others, but certainly for myself.
Yeah,
I just turned 60 actually,
yeah.
you know, and last week, and it came about quite all of a sudden, you know, and miraculously.
Well, that's the thing that I was going to say too, in the sense that, you know, once we get into our 60s, of course, our own mortality just becomes so much clearer. And the unfortunate part is that one's mortality in your instance became so clear when you were in your 20s and things that you had to see, being around people who were dying of AIDS. But now it's, you know, it's an interesting phenomenon. You may live to be 70 or 75 or 80 and die of natural causes, but a man not who had AIDS, but a man who lived with AIDS his entire life. And that becomes an amazing story in order to be able to tell as well.
There's a lot of intricacies to survivorship, which one only really knows if you're in a life-threatening situation that needs to be maintained. I mean, we live in a society without universal health care, for instance. So there are things that keep men like me alive that are very intricate, even though you know, we're healthy.
Yes, and of course, one of the things, I was reading something about the exhibition I was talking about earlier about misinformation. There was a column in the New York Native in 1983 talking about who people should trust and not trust, and the importance of health insurance was very, very key for a lot of people at that time. And of course, today we see health insurance and the difficulty of people having access to it. Paul, a lot of what we heard from Eric was this intergenerational idea, and certainly the idea of his renewed sense of the future is about his belief in intergenerationalism. You touched on that as well. Any additional observations you have after hearing Eric's essay again?
Well, going off of sort of what Eric was saying about sort of like the healing effects when looking through some of those images, I think he mentioned wondering if it went both ways, if it was both healing for him and the people that were in the room with him. And I think it, you know, for me at least, it very much was, because you know, it confirmed something that I already knew, but that there still wasn't enough evidence of, which is that people, you know, during that time, you know, existed, and were also able to maintain sort of loving relationships, physical intimacy, and that they weren't just I don't know, like living fearfully, that they were living fully and in communion with one another. And I think that that definitely has a healing aspect for people that are of my generation, because we just don't see a lot of examples of that. It's usually when HIV and AIDS are discussed, it's all about the trauma of it, which of course is important. But I think that one of the things that Eric's work does very well is humanizes the experience and really fleshes it out.
Great. Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that observation. One last quick question before we wrap up here. And Eric, you've mentioned it a little bit, but just talk a little bit more about the Leaves project. You know, it's so wonderful that you've sort of taken personalities and mixed them in with nature through the leaves and these wonderful wire sculptures that you've made. Is the project done? Is it still ongoing? You know, will this project be with you forever? And, you know, 50 years from now, when art historians look at that project together, what is it that you want them to get out of it?
Well, when I first started the project, I was at the McDowell Colony, and it was in the fall in New Hampshire, shortly after I had had my miraculous and surreal recovery. So the installation that you see behind me in the one photograph where I'm nude in front of it was the original, say 86 or so. And it's since grown to be more than 380, but actually in actuality, that's more in concept or theory. I committed to making a leaf for anyone that I knew who died to complications of AIDS. And also that I wanted it to go out into the world in various capacities. So if I placed a work or donated one to an institution, or it was acquired, I could construct those leaves from the patterns. So I mean, in actuality, the piece has been something very actually overwhelming for me to keep up with. I just had it be the center of a grant application, so I could spend a year restoring it, the piece that, and doing inventory on who was missing, making ones for people that I have names on papers, and then also to have biographies for each person, whether it is a more comprehensive piece for someone who, you know, is more prominently a cultural contributor, to a shorter poetic if there was someone that I didn't know so well. So my goal with that project is to have it as an intact installation. Actually, when you visited my studio so many years ago, you encouraged me to look at the installation version to be the intact version, and other framed pieces that have done since to be more ephemeral. So I would like for the piece to come into an intact form that I would still commit to adding to as people that I knew past. And to have a historical and as well as a poetic text to correspond. I mean, I'm one individual artist. I don't have a staff behind me as some artists do. So if I can get this grant or another, have other means of internships to help, that would be the goal.
Well, that's great. It's great to hear. It's also nice to. I do remember, of course, that visit when you and I talked about that in your studio so many years ago. It was probably 10 years ago when you and I saw that. So. Well, Paul, Eric, thank you so much for your time. It's been terrific and it's been great. And so for those of you, the book is called Lifelines, and Paula has thrown in the link a way for you to be able to get it. I think DAP is the distributor for it. And we're seeing some nice thank yous pop up here. I want to say thank you again to Paula Sierra, who's here behind the scenes. Thank you, Paula. Thank you for all your help making this all happen. And to all of you who've joined us, again, you'll be able to see a complete version of this on our website at stonewall-museum.org. Hello again to our friends on Facebook. Happy to see you there as well. And come visit us on the website or certainly here in South Florida. Eric, Paul, thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you, Hunter. And thank you everyone for joining us. Appreciate it.